Join me, Harriet Gould, for the Lab Matters podcast to hear fascinating stories every week from the inspiring people behind the science. In this episode of Lab Matters with me, Harriet Gould, I'm joined by science graduate turned politician, the member for North West Cambridgeshire, Sam Carling. Today I am joined by Sam Carling, the Member of Parliament for North West Cambridgeshire and co-chair of the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee. Sam, thank you for joining us today.
Very much for having me.
Great pleasure. Now, Sam, you are originally from County Durham, and it says a couple of different places actually on your Wikipedia page, which I've got up in front of me. We've got Crook and we've got Bishop Auckland. So why don't you take us back to where you grew up and how life evolved in those early years?
Yeah, so obviously both of those are very rural areas. I was born in Bishop Auckland Hospital, and then I lived in Crook, which is a town nearby, for about the first 16 years of my life when I moved to Bishop Auckland again. So I had a very interesting upbringing, I guess, because I was raised in quite an insular religious community in the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so then going down a science career, I guess, was probably something not many people expected because that religion teaches essentially that science has got a lot of things wrong. It's full creationism, you know, it's along the lines of humans being put on the earth about 6,000 years ago. And so I kind of, the first however many years of my life when I was believing in that, had a very low opinion, I suppose, of a lot of biologists as a result of it. But I always had a real curiosity around how the world works. And originally that started off in kind of a mechanical sense. So I loved engineering, particularly computer science as well. I was potentially going to go down the computer science route for a career at one point. And for various reasons, I sort of started to wake up from that religion when I was about 13. And I developed an absolute love of biology and how the human body works and how animals and plants work more generally. And just kind of threw myself headfirst into that. So over time, changed kind of intended career paths, went from computer science down to biology, particularly disease biology. I always found it most interesting to sort of look at how things were going wrong and look at what kind of interventions we could make to make them go right again at the cellular level, which is why I ended up going down the natural science route and did a pathology degree.
Hmm. And how did your parents react to the change in your religious beliefs?
It's hard to say really, because I think it was sort of quite a gradual thing, so there was no sudden sort of announcement. But yeah, I think I was the first in my family to go to university, or in the kind of close family anyway. And yeah, my family have always been very supportive of it, to be honest. So it all worked out really well, I think.
Mm. Good. And so you were always slightly predisposed because of your curiosity. And but then so at what point in your education did you know, yes, biology is the one?
Think it was when I was doing my GCSEs, because I loved all of the three sciences, and that's one of the reasons I did natural sciences as a degree course, because a variety of different universities do it in different ways around the country. But the course I did at Cambridge essentially allows you to take a variety of different science options and then narrow down as your course goes on, which worked for me because I couldn't decide what I wanted to drop. So in my first year, I did kind of cell biology, physiology, and then a chemistry option as well as maths. So it worked out really well, I suppose.
Hmm. So let's just nip back to before Cambridge, because there you've got a really impressive roll call of achievements, and some of them did happen before you went to Cambridge. So let's just talk about those for a minute, shall we? I don't know what came first, that you're because you did have a clean sweep of A star grades at A levels. And you've won prizes, the Salters Nuffield Prize, for your which was biology specific. I don't know if you could just talk us through how you tackled writing a paper for such a prize, or what was in your mind at the
Yeah.
time.
Sure. So yeah, I was a bit crazy at sixth form, and I did five A levels because it was the same thing. I just loved all of the sciences. I wanted to do maths and further maths, and so many people tried to tell me I was mad, and I kind of went, I probably am, but I want to do it anyway. And so I did, and I really loved it. Um, Yeah, so I think the A-level biology prize you're talking about, that's normally awarded for the kind of the top exam performers in a year group. But because I was in the year where exams were cancelled, and that was part of the reason that then led me into politics, that
And
didn't
that's the
happen.
that's a relatively recent year. That was the COVID year,
Yes,
right?
so it was
Yeah.
2020. So they ran an essay competition instead for it that year. And I wrote an essay based on an extended project qualification that I'd done on carbon quantum dots, which are sort of early type of nanotechnology. I haven't spent much time looking at where that's got to actually. I don't know where that's gone as a field, if anywhere. But so I did a kind of experimental based EPQ looking at kind of how these are absorbed through the digestive system using earthworms as a model. And then, yeah, I was very kindly given an award for it, which was quite nice. I got to go down to London, and sort of that was one of my first proper times going to London, I guess, because growing up in the Northeast, it's obviously a very long journey, and
Mm,
I kind of visited in a holiday sense once or twice, but not really spent much time there properly.
what stuck out to you most when you went to collect the prize?
Um, so I mean, it's essentially so the Salters Nuffield Prize essentially comes from a particular exam board of A-level biology, which is the Salters Nuffield course run by EdXL and sponsored by the Salters Institute, in turn run by the Salters Company, one of the livery companies in London, that kind of originally emerged as regulators of the salt trade, and then when that didn't wasn't necessary anymore, they've essentially become a philanthropy a charitable organisation that looks to support chemistry and science education and excellence. So it was just a bit sort of unusual, I guess, to be in a room with some very accomplished scientists. There was the previous chief scientific advisor to the UK government was there actually that day, I think. And it might have been a previous chief medical officer, but I think it was the previous scientific advisor. And so it was very much a case of, oh, wow, I'm in a room with all these sort of accomplished scientists. And I had started at university by that point, actually, because they kind of did it because of the pandemic disruption, they did it after the kind of official awarding sort of thing. Um, but yeah, it was still quite an experience, I think.
I bet it was. And when you were applying for universities, was Cambridge an obvious choice, the natural choice? Did you have anyone advising you or supporting you? You said that people called you mad for doing five A levels, but was there anyone championing your ambition?
Oh, absolutely. I was really well supported, both in secondary school and in the sixth form I went to. To be genuinely honest, it was actually the course that attracted me more than Cambridge University itself. Nowhere did that course structure the same way in terms of allowing you to have that really modular exploration of different areas and then specialize later on. I had no real idea where I wanted to go in terms of my third year at that point, my specialization. Though looking back, you can kind of see the hints as to that I might have gone down the pathology route as I did. There are natural science courses at other universities that suit, different people who are looking for different things, but they're just structured a bit differently in that typically you kind of do half of one science course and half of another, and that's how they make it work. So it was just different, and that was one of the things that really attracted me. I had a lot of support, and I was really grateful for that. I remember my interview was very stressful. I will never forget that. Some of the questions I was asked in there, I thought I'd failed it. I really did. Because I had two interviews, one of which I kind of thought I did all right in, and then there was a maths question at the end that was really quite sort of tricky. And the other one, I sort of made a few silly errors early on. I thought I'm done for here. And then I got an offer letter.
Fantastic. Tell me some of the questions if you remember them.
I don't know if I'm allowed to.
Oh yeah, no,
Because
you're
I
probably
think they
not.
reuse them in the university. So hang on, let me try and generalize. Yeah, so there was a lot of sort of objects and concepts and looking at like I'm really not going to be able to give you enough detail here without
Don't
potentially
worry.
breaking university confidentiality. Forgive me.
We'll move on and let you off the hook. Um, so luckily they saw through what you deemed to be a couple of errors. They saw your potential and offered you the place, and you were thrilled, or at some point were you like, oh gosh, I've got to move to Cambridge? What went through your mind?
Was absolutely thrilled. I've always, throughout a lot of my life, I've spent a lot of time interacting with people older than me. Sort of even in a school setting, I got on with teachers better than the other students some of the time. And also, I guess, with that religious upbringing, there's not very many sort of children in local congregations within the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I always had to sort of socialize, if you will, with adults. And so I was used to kind of being a bit different wherever I go. And so kind of the thought of going to Cambridge and it being full of people that weren't very much like me, didn't really daunt me too much, if that makes sense, because I was kind of used to dealing with that. But yeah, very much when I arrived, it was an absolute melting pot of different people from different backgrounds, and culturally very different to where I grew up in the Northeast. Um,
What were
and it was
the
a good
biggest difference?
experience.
What were the most noticeable differences?
I mean, I guess just kind of the way people talk, the sort of the expectations, I guess sometimes people have and have. There's all sorts of tales from Cambridge and other subjects where sort of, people who perhaps study languages, professors going, "Oh, I just assumed you had studied Latin in the past." It's like, no, not how that works, I'm afraid. So I didn't really have anything that egregious, but yeah, there's certainly still sort of bits and pieces of kind of people not really recognizing the diverse range of backgrounds people have. But we're getting
Okay.
better on that front, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Um, and it was at Cambridge that you started getting interested in politics as well as all the scientific offerings.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've kind of said in previous interviews in public that kind of the thing that really opened my eyes, to use a bit of a cliche phrase, to the political world was when the previous government decided to cancel A-level exams during the pandemic and replace them with teacher assessed grades. And the way that was done, in my opinion, was just really not fair on students. It wasn't fair on teachers, and it let a lot of people down, in my view. I personally was okay. The grades I was assigned originally, I actually did miss my Cambridge offer because my Cambridge offer required an A star in chemistry. And for some reason, the algorithm decided that I was downgraded to an A in chemistry from the teacher assessed grade. My school wasn't given any A stars in chemistry, actually. And so that just sort of was the way it was. Now, the university accepted me anyway. And then the grade was altered later when the government U-turned its decision. But just that whole process really made me think, you know, a few years ago, the school I went to for secondary school, their sixth form closed. I looked into it. Oh, budget cuts. Again, decisions being made in Westminster. The high street was kind of dying off in the town in Bishop Auckland. The hospital was kind of wards were closing down. Again, you've got government decisions being made here. And so that really just made me think that a lot of the things that were impacting people around me and my local community were coming from Westminster. And it was very much just a case of me thinking, I just want to get involved with this and sort of, because essentially it was genuinely as quick of a process as they're really not doing a very good job. A lot of people could do a better job. Oh, maybe I could do a better job. Yeah, I'm going to get involved. It was literally that quick. And I kind of just went from that. I never really envisioned myself going into a political career. I very much I wanted to go down the research route. I was very happy sort of just being involved a little bit locally. But then as often happens in political parties of all colours, you start to do a little bit and people go, oh, could you do just a little bit more? And could you just get a little bit more involved? And obviously, the same thing happens in labs. Could you just maybe do that presentation? Oh, you were great at that. Maybe can you go do this? Can you do that? Yeah, it's exactly the same in politics. And before I knew it, I had an opportunity to stand for local government, which I did. And then I had an incredible opportunity to be able to stand for Parliament.
Hmm. And how did you, because I mean, presumably you have to do a number of interviews to get selected as a candidate and especially nationally. Did you find that there to be any similarities or references, at least in the interview process for being selected as a candidate, to the interview process of being um, interviewed for a place at university?
Perhaps. I mean, I did a number of PhD interviews as well when I was looking at sort of what I was going to do after my degree, and kind of honestly, I think some of those were perhaps slightly more rigorous than some of the political ones because within politics, I guess, we have kind of a variety of different tiers of interviews and different parties do it in different ways. But you normally go through a panel process that essentially approves you to go on a list of candidates that kind of go, yeah, this person's sensible, reflects the values of the political party. We think they'd be a good politician, good elected representative, so they can go forward. But then it's very much you just have to secure votes from people who live in the area you're seeking to stand from, and you normally have a selection meeting and a vote's taken, and that's who the candidate is. I had quite an unusual experience in that Northwest Cambridgeshire wasn't a target seat in the general election. So the Labour Party quite rightly decided, look, the key thing here is we need to form a government. We're going to pour pretty much all of our resources into the seats we need to do that we think are most winnable demographically and for other reasons. And then we're not going to sort of put as much resources into other seats. Those candidates kind of were a lot more free in some ways, as I was to kind of do it my way and campaign the way that worked best for me. So kind of having less resources but more freedom was a bit of a trade-off, I guess. But it all worked out. I think in my case, the selection was I didn't have to go through that vote process because of it being a non-target seat. I did when I was managed to be a councillor, so I went through it there. It's a very different world, I guess.
Hmm. And of course, you've got people at the university who are professors and such like, and it's a little bit different in politics, I guess. You know, you've got members of the party that then haven't necessarily been members of parliament before, or maybe you might have one or two, but it is a different kettle of fish for sure. Um, and then at the point that you were selected, how did you feel about moving full, like potentially full time? Because of course you don't know anything until after the election, although I
Yeah.
think perhaps before the 2024 election, the writing was somewhat on the wall. How did you feel about the prospect of potentially winning and leaving behind the marvelous beginnings of a scientific career?
So I had pretty much decided by that point that actually research wasn't for me. So I had started to do a master's, and I had some health issues during that year. So I ended up dropping to part-time hours, especially given I was also doing my work as a counsellor at the time as well. And I essentially did a master's to work out whether or not I wanted to do a PhD. And I answered that question reasonably quickly, and I didn't. So I ended up withdrawing from that master's course after the general election because I hadn't gotten, I was about halfway through it, I guess, because of the part-time hours. For me, what I really, really loved was teaching. And I really kind of found that, especially what before I got to university, I used to do some tutoring. And then while I was doing that master's, I did some supervising at the university as well with some first year undergraduates, which I really, really loved. My intention had always been to kind of, well, I say always. Originally, I wanted to go into a research career. Then it morphed into I'd like to do a PhD, and then I'd like to primarily focus on teaching. And then it morphed to I actually don't think I can stomach the PhD. Just because of the way kind of it worked for me. I always have loved learning science academically and kind of just knowing how things work, but then focusing as researchers do on that really small area for
Mm,
such a long period of time. It didn't work for me. And I think actually the whole system by which we train people up in science and then we completely change the skill set when you go into a lab. And then actually, if you go into lab management, you completely change the skill set again. It's very strange. We're assessing people on skill set A for whether they can have a job in skill set B, and then assess you on skill set B for whether you can have a job in skill set C. Why do we do this?
it's the
You'd think
same
there'd
in a
be a better way of doing that.
it's very similar in a corporate environment. Yes, yeah, it's something to um, address, let's say.
Very much so.
Yeah. So you did win the election. You became a member of parliament, notably a very young one. And a lot of people who become a member of parliament for the first time talk about a tsunami of emails and a baptism of fire and all the rest of it. How did you find it?
Exactly like that. So yeah, I mean, in my case, I was still living in Cambridge at the time, having been working there. So I had two house moves on the horizon because I needed to move to Northwest Cambridgeshire and also find somewhere in London. So there was a lot of sort of immediate sort of personal life changing happening. And for people who were kind of already in employment, essentially you change job and potentially have to move house. Um, and kind of all, and you're basically starting a small business as well because you've got to recruit staff all simultaneously, while people are already emailing you, of course. So it absolutely is a tsunami. I remember when I got my laptop and opened it up, we're already sort of 100 plus emails, and I had to balance, well, okay, I need to sort of deal with these, but also I need to recruit my staff because I can't deal with these as fast as they're coming in. So it's going to have to be a case of prioritize the urgent casework, and others are going to have to wait for a while. And then, of course, people start chasing and going, well, this is a bad start. You're not already not replying to emails. Think, oh.
Doing my
So, yeah,
best.
it gets better, but it takes a while.
Yeah. So you've had about a year now, haven't you? Just
Yeah,
over.
it simultaneously feels like it's been nowhere near that amount of time and way longer than that amount of time, if
Mm.
that makes any sense at all. In some aspects, you think it was yesterday, and other aspects, you feel like you've been doing it for ages. But I'm still very much loving the work that I'm doing, and I think we have a lot more scientists in Parliament now than we have had before. There's well over 100, sort of, if under certain definitions. And I think that's really, really helpful in terms of trying to make government. more generally listen to evidence more and to kind of bring scientific voices into policy making, which we haven't really had at an appropriate level for a while, particularly during the pandemic. I mean, we saw sort of our numbers being discussed on live TV. Whoever thought that would happen? And just sort of listening to, so we say, with the best one in the world, journalists not quite understanding what was going on in that respect. And then members of the public also kind of really struggling with some of the concepts, I guess, that were being discussed there. And it just made me really also think there's a real lack of scientific literacy in some of these areas. And sort of how do we address that? How is the education system perhaps not teaching the key things that people need to know in their life about science, even if they're not really interested in going into a scientific career? And how do we deal with that?
Mm. It is. I think it's the training as well for scientists in when you go into Parliament. You an instinct is to jump to conclusions unless you've had that kind of training where it's a question of assessing the facts and working through them and remembering what the goal is and working towards that. And I think a scientific training really does pave the way, or at least a scientific literacy, as you said, does pave the way for that kind of approach. Um, so yes, very encouraging that that's growing. Pleased to hear it. Now then, the other thing that I introduced you as was the co-chair of the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee, and that you were deputy chair, I think, when you were originally involved with George Freeman as the chair, and of course Stephen
Well, Stephen,
Metcalfe was the chair beforehand, and he has been on this podcast as well. Um, and so tell me how you got involved. I mean, it seems like a natural progression and obvious really to ask, but ne nevertheless, tell us how it happened.
yeah, so the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee is one of the oldest all-party parliamentary groups, which are sort of informal groupings of MPs that are regulated in certain ways by Parliament, and are supported to kind of develop work on different issues, really. And there's a huge number of these, and Parliament's gotten stricter on sort of what can constitute one because there were just so many. There were more than there were MPs at one point. I think there still are, actually, despite them having gotten strict on the rules. But this one is kind of one of the most kind of, I think, well, how do I phrase this? Kind of well connected outside Parliament in that, we're able to draw in a lot of different sort of areas of science and professional organisations in. And it was kind of set up. I mean, I learned of this from Stephen Metcalfe's interview on your podcast, which I listened to yesterday in preparation. I think he said something along the lines, didn't he, of it being set up by around when Churchill was Prime Minister to do with the war effort at the time. And then it morphed into this organisation to essentially just try and promote more dialogue between politicians and scientists. And so essentially, it was I hadn't actually seen the emails around advertising it, but I'd come out of another meeting and I was speaking to a friend of mine, Adam Thompson, who's MP for Erewash and also has a scientific background. I think it was him. Or it may have been someone else. But then, kind of whoever it was, kind of said, "Oh, this is going on down the corridor," and I went, "Oh, sounds great. I'll join." And then they needed a vice chair at the time, and I went, "Sure, why not?" No, it wasn't Adam Thompson. It was Sadiq Al Hassan, who's the another MP, he's a former pharmacist. So yeah, as I said, there's loads of us now. So I got involved that way, and I think we're kind of doing a bit of a leadership changeover at the moment. So George is stepping down to focus on a few other commitments he's picked up in October, and I'm taking over. So we're looking at, I think, how we can make sure that that body is being as effective as it can be and potentially sort of stepping into the policy development space at some point. There's a bit of discussion we need to have around how we link up with the Science and Technology Select Committee, because I think
Mm,
there's a lot of potential for the two to kind of complement one another, and work together really, because we have a lot of industry voices that really want to kind of tell their stories and engage MPs and parliamentarians, because the House of Lords is involved too in the work that they're doing. And there's a really good competition that it runs called STEM for Britain, where we have researchers from all sorts of fields have the opportunity, early career researchers mainly, to come into Parliament and present their work, to their own MP, to others, kind of essentially doing a poster competition and symposium within Parliament, which is really great. And I really enjoyed that this year.
mm. Were you judging?
I did judge. Yes, I think I was on a judging panel. I think it was for the final. I'm trying to remember which award it was. But yeah, that was really useful. It was quite interesting because I think the other people on the panel, I think there was a couple of scientists, but not many, and so I kind of took on the role of asking the more probing, difficult questions. I was kind of the bad cop in the interview, I guess, which was I felt really bad, but I wasn't too bad. I just kind of I picked out a bit of data and went, can you just describe that bit of data in a bit more detail for me and what that signifies, just to kind of give people the opportunity to show that they were on top of that, and they all were. We had some great presentations, so I really enjoyed that.
Brilliant. It sounds great. Um, and people can join the Parliamentary and Scientific Committee, organisations and people. If somebody wanted to join, if there was someone listening who thought, I might be quite interested in getting involved, how would they do it?
Yeah, so there are individual memberships available, I think, for a variety of different people. There is a website which will go into it in more detail because I'm slightly rusty on the details. So there is an individual membership. There's professional memberships, which a lot of bodies have, and there's ways to come in through universities as well. It may well be something we look at. I mean, once I kind of take over the leadership of it in October, I think we'll sit down and have a little discussion around how we can promote it a bit more and how we can spread the message out there. Because there's lots of opportunities to come into Parliament and kind of have discussions with MPs who are interested in science and just see some of the great work that's going on that's relevant to policy making as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different opportunities there, and I think that the link is, I'm trying to remember what the URL is. If you just look up science in Parliament, it should come up quite easily if anyone's interested.
Science in Parliament. We'll have a look and see if we can all join. That'll be brilliant. Um, so, Sam, just before we head towards the end of this, and I think you've probably alluded to this already, but just to check, just to double check, what if you could change one thing about science overall, and given that you're in a fairly good position to maybe actually enact this or support the enactment of such a thing, if you could change that one thing, what would it be?
I think it would have to be encouraging additional scientific literacy, in the general public, but also among MPs. And there are a number of us who have that background now, but also just in making sure that people all throughout government and throughout all political parties are more evidence-based and more evidence-focused and understand how to interpret scientific evidence and how to interpret data and studies on different issues because there's such a wealth available. But the problem we have, I think, in politics is if you have one study that suggests something, regardless if it might have dodgy foundations when you look into it, that's enough for a headline. And then, politicians can get bounced into acting because, you can have journalists going, but well, look, this study just said this. Well, aren't you going to fix this problem by doing X? And
Mm.
if we spent time looking at it, it may turn out that X is actually not very good. And Y or Z would be better. Um, but yeah, so I'm hoping that we can improve that over time.
And it is difficult these days because of the pace of how things get reported. So people do feel, politicians in particular, do feel the pressure to respond to something that has gone like wildfire across the media right there and then. And yes, and sometimes you do have to say stop and take that methodical approach and wait a minute. Let's go through it and then I'll respond. It would be nice to see that. I think that would be very nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. Well, look, Sam, it's been really lovely to have you and for you to make the time and share a little bit. Thank you very much. And good luck with the rest of your political career and bringing science to the forefront.
Thank you very much.
Did you enjoy that episode of Lab Matters? If you did, please do send it to the people that you think will enjoy it the most.